Hello everybody, and welcome to a new episode of Gaming in the Wild, a video games podcast about games from the artistic, creative side of the tracks, from indie to AAA. My name's John, I'm your host. I'm a journalist based out in Reykjavik, Iceland, where this week, winter is back. We got snow, it's freezing, the wind is blowing, the wind is howling. Quarantine is back, so bars are closed and restaurants are closed and stuff like that. We're having a little tiny mini spike of UK COVID, so things are pretty quiet over here right now. But it left a lot of time for me to tuck into some games in the last week. After finishing Life is Strange, really enjoyed that game. You can hear all about it in the last episode. This week, I've played a wide variety of stuff actually. I've been picking up a few games that I'd been meaning to get to. I got a parcel from the UK that had in it a physical copy of Pikmin 3 that I completely forgot that I'd ordered, so that was a nice surprise. I haven't played any of the Pikmin games since that first original Pikmin game back on the GameCube, and I absolutely loved it at the time, and have had a soft spot for Pikmin ever since. I was waiting for this game to come, I was waiting for the Pikmin games to come to Switch, and so in the meantime I actually played Hi Pikmin on the 3DS, and I mentioned that in a past episode too. But Pikmin 3 is a real upgrade for the series. It's so much fun, so colourful. I always forget how joyful and happy Nintendo games are until I pick one up, and I'm like, oh yeah, I remember now. I remember why I'm such a Nintendo stan. Those games are just designed to delight you, you know. They're so colourful and happy. And yeah, the new Pikmin game, I mean, new as in I've never played it before. I guess a lot of people haven't, seeing as the Wii U sold so badly back at the time. So it's been really fun to drop into that game and see how they've advanced the formula. The first Pikmin game had quite a few flaws to it, you know. It was like, it had quite harsh timers, and the camera was a bit weird and stuff like that. But they've ironed all of that stuff out for Pikmin 3. It's a really slick, enjoyable experience. So I've been having a great time with that one. I also have been getting some good use out of the Backbone and iPhone setup that I've been playing on recently. I've been exploring what I can do with it. I posted a tweet that actually compared the size of my Switch to the size of my Backbone and iPhone XS Max setup. And it turns out the screen is actually basically the same size. For some reason I had it in my mind that the cell phone setup was so much smaller. But the screen on the iPhone is a Retina screen. It's really bright and crisp, and the chip in there is obviously pretty powerful, so it can run games far beyond what I thought it would be able to run. And people were really surprised when I posted that tweet to compare the Switch, because the Switch is such a kind of a hefty, heavy unit. It really feels like a games machine, you know? And to have that phone laid next to it and realise that it's kind of basically the same was a bit of an eye-opener, so I looked into what else I could play on it, and I signed up for a trial on Google Stadia, which I know is a bit of a failing and a little bit of a maligned format for games. But I tried it out with a few games that you get for free. You can get Destiny 2 for free on there, and during the trial I also picked up Journey to the Savage Planet and a couple of other things, and so I've been having fun trying out that setup. They are streamed games, obviously, so streamed games, I've never had a completely smooth experience streaming games. It's always been a little bit glitchy, and it's the same on this. If I'm playing downstairs right next to the Wi-Fi router, then Destiny 2 runs pretty smoothly, with just the very occasional drop of frames. So I've been having fun. I mean, first-person shooters aren't exactly my genre of choice, but I really like Destiny, actually. It reminds me of the original Halo. Just a really fun sci-fi setting, and a really creative world, and a sort of sense of wonder to it. So as you're walking around and discovering this world, you look up and see kind of armadas in the sky and kind of distant sci-fi cities stretching out into the distance. And I've only played like about an hour on it, but I actually had a really good time, so I think I might persist with Destiny. Especially as you don't have to be signed up for Stadia Pro to play it. It's free to play. And so it's like a really nice, slick streaming game that I can just pick up and play for free on Stadia. Journey to the Savage Planet, I only started out today and just did a half hour on it just to see what it was like. I really like the look of it, actually. It's really funny sci-fi game where you're kind of scanning the environment around you. And there's a kind of a sort of capitalist theme going on where you're kind of under the heel of this company that's kind of thrown you out into space to go and explore an unexplored planet and find out if there are resources there to scan the nature. And they've sent you out there with just the bare minimum of tools. And it's like a running joke in the game that you've been sent out there. There are these really funny videos from the company CEO who just kind of lets you know how dire the situation you're in is, whilst kind of laughing at you a little bit. So I enjoyed that one. I think I'll get stuck into that one as well a little bit later on. I also dipped into a few more Apple Arcade games. There was a new game that came out called Hitchhiker that I was very curious about. I think games about road trips and games about travel could find a real niche at this point in the quarantine, where we're all kind of done with it. You know, we kind of want to be out living our lives like we used to and traveling and having fun. And so the idea of games opening that little window for us, a little virtual window into that kind of experience, seems really fun. But Hitchhiker, it turns out, is kind of a surreal game. It's like, it's not even a walking simulator, it's a sitting simulator. You're sitting in the passenger seat of a car with a driver who seems to have all of this wholesomeness to him, but then also turns out to be a little creepy, like you've known him before in the past and he knows things about you. And through talking to him, you realise that there's something strange and surreal going on, that you have dropped some memories, there's something dreamlike at play, and that perhaps you're moving through an experience of a different kind. So while it is a kind of a road trip simulator and you'll spend a lot of time looking out of the window and looking around the interior of the car, you can just do things like pick up snacks, wind down the window, talk to your driver. So it's a bit more Lynchian than I was expecting, actually. It's got a little bit of a dark edge to it, a little bit of an existential edge to it. It turns out there are 5 different rides that you can do, and I did the first one. It maybe took an hour or so. And I had medium fun with it, I would say. So maybe I'll come back to that one as well. But also on Apple Arcade, I kind of dipped right down into the depths of Apple Arcade because there are, I think, 120 plus games on there now, maybe more. Maybe it's even up to 150 now, actually. I can't remember. They are dropping quite a few games, but they seem to be mostly puzzle games. But down in the archives, some of the launch titles are quite interesting. And the featured game of this episode is Shinsekai, Into the Depths, which is a kind of an underwater Metroidvania exploration game by Capcom Japan, it's kind of a strange game to come out of Capcom because it feels very, very indie. It feels like it should be filed alongside games like Ori and games like Hollow Knight, but it's a Capcom game. But it was a really nice surprise to play that one, so I'm looking forward to telling you all about it as the featured game of the episode. But before diving into that, I'll do a quick mention of the show's Patreon. This show is supported by Patreon supporters. If you enjoy the show, you can feel free to pop over to patreon.com/gaminginthewild and support the show for $1 a month and get access to our Discord community and get sale recommendations, occasional extra episodes, and other fun perks. So if you enjoy the show, please do feel free to pop over and show a little bit of support. Even just $1 a month, that's like $12 a year, makes a big difference, gives me a little boost, lets me know that people out there are appreciating and enjoying the show, and I really appreciate that. It gives me some good feedback and some good solid momentum to keep on pushing forward with it. So it's patreon.com/gaminginthewild, and thanks very much if you're interested in that. And without further ado, let's move on and talk about the featured game of the episode, Shinsekai, Into the Depths. So Shinsekai Into the Depths is a game that came out in 2019, made by the Japanese branch of Capcom. And it was actually produced by Apple for the Apple Arcade as a launch title for Apple Arcade. And since then it has been ported to Switch. It came to Switch late last year, and so it's available for anyone that has a Switch. You can get it in the eShop. And I think I can see why they sent it over to the Switch as the only other platform that it's gone to. It's perfect for a handheld format. I will say from the off that I played this on a backbone controller, so I had 2 sticks that I could use. The right stick is for aiming, the left stick is for movement. I had my 4 buttons, shoulder buttons, and it was a really nice experience on a controller. I'm not sure how it would have fared if it had been touch controls only. I think less so, perhaps. So that's just something for you to bear in mind if you fancy this game. But the game is an underwater Metroidvania with a focus on exploration, a little bit of combat, a little bit of resource management, and some environmental puzzles and storytelling. But unlike most Metroidvanias, you're not really doing laps of the game world with your newfound abilities that you pick up along the way, although there are elements of that in the game. Shinsekai is actually more about forward momentum, or should I say downward momentum. There aren't many times when you'll find yourself looping back to previous areas. When you do, it's usually into like a section of a previous area that you didn't have access to before. So you might re-enter an old area. There are 4 or 5 different areas to explore, each with their own characteristics, but you'll rarely find yourself repeating sections of scenery, although it can be a little labyrinthine at times. But the first thing that grabbed me about this game is the attention to detail with the audio environment and how that works with the visuals. The game begins when you see an underwater miner who looks more like an astronaut. The developers refer to them as the Aquanaut. They're wearing a big, bulky sort of spacesuit, and they're mining on a cliff face deep down in the ocean. And you see them pulling out some resources and heading back to their home. And their home turns out to be a sunken ship that has gone nose down into the seabed. But the top half of the interior of the ship still has air in it, and so you can't come in through an airlock, and you can tell that the Aquanaut is living quite a DIY existence. There are bits of broken technology lying around. The Aquanaut feeds in the minerals into an air-producing machine and goes up to like a little bunk. And so it seems like they're just kind of clinging on to existence, and roughing it, basically. But at the very start of the game, in the intro, some encroaching ice comes down and captures the Aquanaut's home, and the Aquanaut leaps out of the door and just avoids this crunching ice that just blocks off the whole thing. And so that's where the game begins. You're left with no options other than to head deeper into the ocean and see what's down there, see if you can find somewhere to live, see if you can find a way to keep on existing. And so the game is a voyage into the unknown, basically. And your Aquanaut has a couple of abilities. You can shoot out a hook, you have a little kind of club that you can swing to break obstacles and to bat away any hostile life forms that you come into contact with. But the movement is quite remarkable for the Aquanaut, because it manages to capture this feeling of being heavy, like when you're on the bottom of the sea and you're walking, the footsteps are kind of slow and sluggish, and you really feel like you're kind of limping along, kind of pushing your way through this kind of hostile environment with all of these bubbling sounds around you and sloshing sounds. But you can also jump, and while you're in the air, you can release a little bit of your air tank, and you'll shoot forward, so you can kind of boost. And when you're boosting through the water, the movement becomes very graceful, actually. Even though your character is kind of ragdolling, like flailing their limbs around as they are jetted through the ocean water, it feels very light all of a sudden. And it's actually quite pleasurable to do. You can't hit any surfaces too hard because you'll fracture your air tanks and lose air. So you have to kind of try and do soft landings even when you're moving around at quite high speed. But I found this to be quite intuitive and quite enjoyable as a method of moving through a game. I really enjoyed just kind of letting rip with my air tank and flying through the space. At first you have to be very sparing whilst using your air to propel yourself, because you only have a couple of air tanks. But as you move around the space, you can sometimes switch on the light on your suit and it will reveal glitter in the walls, the sea walls and in the ground. And you can, as you're a miner, you can dig out minerals like old fossils, bones and different kinds of metal and rock. And you can use them to upgrade your suit. So you can upgrade your gloves so that you can climb higher with more endurance. You can upgrade your boots so that you can land harder. And you can walk over ice without getting frozen as quickly. And you can also upgrade your whole suit so that you can go into deeper, denser areas of water. There is always a red line at the bottom of the area that you can explore, and that's as much pressure as your suit can take. So as you move through the ocean, exploring and mining, you upgrade your suit, you see that red line sink when you get a power-up, and you know that you can go deeper still. So it does have some of those hallmarks of classic Metroidvania games where you're upgrading yourself so that you can explore different areas of the sea. And as you get deeper, you'll move through areas with different characteristics, starting off in quite a kind of a mellow, sort of close to the surface area with lots of sea vegetables and lots of peaceful fish swimming around. Some of them are hostile and you have to fight them off. But as you're powering up your suit, you're slowly building up your strength as you move through the areas. And you're starting to get a bit more of a clue of what kind of world it is that you're in. You're starting to get a few more clues of how you've ended up in this dire situation, and also what has become of the world. It seems pretty clear that this is a far future sci-fi, and that your diver is kind of carving out a living under the water because sea ice has taken over upstairs and the rest of the world. And so you start to get this kind of picture, a slow sketch coming into focus of what kind of world you're in, who you are, and what the future might hold for you. And something that impressed me right from the get-go with this game, it is the attention to detail. Starting with the Aquanaut, your character is really nicely designed. I went online and looked at some developer diaries about this game. There are some great interviews out there with the producer, who is from Capcom in the US, and the director of the game, who's from Capcom Japan. And you can see them talking about some of the inspirations behind the game. And the Aquanaut is actually based on a traditional Japanese sculpture called a dogu. And those are clay figurines that date all the way back to 400 BC. They're these kind of bulky figures with stylized characteristics. And your Aquanaut has like a kind of a beautiful ornate faceplate on their suit. And so there is a strong strand of Japanese culture in this game. You'll see kanji sketched onto or sprayed onto or sort of rusting off of the different forms that you pass, like sunken ships, like the one that the Aquanaut lives in. And so you get the feeling that there's a company involved and there's some industrial story going on here too. And there's lots of Japanese flourishes to this. So I think for any gamer that's a fan of Japanese culture, and I know that that's a lot of gamers, this game has a certain flavour to it that can be quite intoxicating actually. It's very, very atmospheric. And that's not the only place where there is attention to detail. I felt that this game was very lovingly constructed. The sound environment is really spectacular. I mean, there are a lot of underwater games out there, like the Subnauticas and the Abzus and stuff, but this one really felt like it took the whole audio environment to the next level. And when I was looking at those developer diaries, it turns out that they actually did things like they took the score for the game and they played it underwater through speakers and then re-recorded it under the water. And after you finish the game, you open up a jukebox mode where you can play the soundtrack to the game, and you can apply different filters. You can hear it when it was out of the water, you can hear it when it was re-recorded under the water, and you can kind of activate different filters and really get a feel for how much work they put into the audio environment. And if you do play this game, I would really suggest playing it with headphones. It does suggest that at the start of the game, and I didn't do that at first because I was just playing on my backbone, kind of lying on the sofa. Didn't feel like putting headphones on, but eventually I did, and it makes a huge difference. It's such an immersive soundscape that they've created, really wonderful. And the same goes for the look of the game. It's very carefully created, like the background and foreground and the whole environment that you're walking through is rendered in 3D. So I guess you could say this was a 2.5D game, a little bit like Ori and the Will of the Wisps or Far Lone Sails, if you've played that one. You're moving left to right, up and down, it's kind of a side-on view, but as you're going past these hulking underwater shapes, they seem to swing into focus, and there are schools of fish that will start off far in the distance and then swim right into the camera sometimes. It's kind of breathtaking, the feeling of depth and immersion that they've managed to create with this game using these really cool tricks. It's like they really went the extra mile on a lot of different fronts. You can really feel the love and care that has gone into this title. The people that made it, obviously, they wanted it to be special, and you can really see that effort has paid off. It all adds up to quite a magical kind of feeling. I felt like I was really exploring. I felt like I was discovering. It's one of those games where I think I mentioned this effect in Life is Strange 2, but it feels like you're moving through a world that has a life of its own, rather than some kind of stiff tableaus that have been set up for the game. Like the wildlife seems to have its own behaviour, and it seems to kind of do its own thing, left to its own devices. Some of the wildlife that you'll meet is hostile, and some of it is just swimming around. There are areas of the game where if you open up a cave or discover a secret, like something that looked like a wall but you discover is actually just really thick algae and moss and underwater vegetation, you can find large caverns that are just completely secret areas of the game where there are some really pretty large-scale underwater, like fish or eels or squids or whatever, and they're just there for you to discover, and they don't disturb you. They just swim around. You can observe them, listen to the beautiful music, and take in all of that kind of sloshing, bubbling soundtrack, and really feel like you're experiencing an ecosystem. And that's on top of all of the combat, of which there is a fair bit. You'll get different weapons as you're moving through the game. You'll get a grappling hook, which is used to trigger switches and to pull yourself up to high points. You'll get a kind of an electrified grapple that shoots forward in a V shape with 2 different points, which can be used to open up doors that have 2 switches and you need to hit them both, and can also be used in combat to kind of cast a net to block off enemies from charging into you. You'll get like a harpoon gun. You'll get lots of different things that are all very useful in both puzzles and in combat. The combat feels a little, how do I say it? It feels a little heavy and slow. It's not like you're going to be doing very snappy responses to anything, but that's kind of in tune with the mood of the game and with the pace of the game. You are underwater, and you are clearly moving through liquid, and you're like a heavy being kind of in your big old bulky suit, and so you're never going to really, feel like the Hollow Knight protagonist or Ori who moves like a firefly on the wind. You're definitely a very heavy character, and some of the criticism I saw of the game revolved around people not feeling like they had enough control over the Aquanaut, but I think this actually worked really well. I think it felt kind of true to the premise, and I appreciated that. I appreciated that they really followed through on the atmosphere that they were going for in all regards. I would like to give a little mention to the music as well. It really is quite a spectacular soundtrack. It's so lovely. It reminds me of music that I used to listen to, like around like 2005 or so, where Warp Records had this kind of period of releasing this kind of slightly melodic, kind of warm sounding music, like Broadcast and Plone, and these kind of electronic projects like this. And the music really does stand up on its own. It starts off very mellow when you're in the shallow blue waters, and as you descend into more cavernous, dark areas, more hazardous areas, it picks up and it has a kind of a contemporary composition and almost jazzy feel to it. Some of it, it's quite an interesting musical palette that they've chosen for this, but it does work. It really adds to the game. And there is a story to the game as well. It's pretty much a wordless game, much like Journey, that kind of thing. But as you move down into the ocean and you discover more of the world that was, you kind of are given hints of a story. You'll find these terminals, and when you open them up, you'll see sketches. You'll see sketches of a kind of a history of what has happened to humanity. You'll see sketches of the things that humanity did when they were living beneath the waves, and the story will start to reveal itself. Although I will say, as a slight criticism, that I felt that, as is often the case when people employ this method of storytelling, I could have done with a little more clarity. I felt like I was kind of grasping at the edges of a story that was quite involving and interesting and intriguing, but the game didn't quite give me as much story as I would have liked. I have a general impression of what the story was, and it carried the game along nicely, but I would have liked a little more clarity. I would have liked to know a little bit more detail. I'm not quite sure how they could have accomplished that. Perhaps, like a series of, in Hyper Light Drifter, if you've played that game, you get like 3 or 4 panel comic books where a creature that you meet will tell you their story in pictograms. And that game too actually left me feeling like I wanted more. Maybe that just goes hand in hand with this game. It is the same with Journey after all. And Abzu, the story is there for you to discover, but I think I would like to be spoon-fed just a little bit more information about this world. Although on the upside of that, there is a lot of environmental storytelling, a lot of the structures that you'll find and the environments that you'll encounter. They tell a story. You can see what has happened. They don't have to tell you everything, but I do wish that I'd been told just a little more. And there are some other things that you have to kind of figure out for yourself as well. Like, there is a map in this game, as every good Metroidvania needs a good map, and the map in this game is pretty good. There is an interesting item that you'll find when you encounter a new area. It's kind of a bell that's hanging under the water, and your character will, in this very Japanese ceremonial style, slowly draw back this kind of gong, and he'll gong the bell, and you'll see the sound waves reverberating through the water. It's a beautiful sound, and there's a good visual effect that goes with it. And it took me a little while to realise this, but when you strike the gong in each area, it will set up your map, basically. It sets up things that you can go and find. It acts like a sonar. So you'll suddenly see on the map that there are crystals that you can go and discover. It will show you the mining points. Some of the things that you'll mine are just to construct extra harpoons for your gun, or extra, ammunition or healing items, things like that. But some of them are necessary for you to progress in the game. So there's like a gemstone on a map. That means there's something for you to mine. But if there's a gem that has a red mark on it, that means that it's an essential one. That's one that's going to help the suit's water pressure situation, so that you can get down to the further levels and the deeper depths. So there's a lot going on in here. I don't want to spoil it too much in case you want to go and play the game yourself, but you do get a little kind of drone companion who will kind of come with you, and like a little robot guy, like in a lot of games have a little robot sidekick. I guess even like Hyper Light Drifter, as I mentioned before, it's just a couple of pixels on the screen, but you have a little companion that will point things out to you in the landscape or tell you when there's a secret nearby, flash up some icons and things like that. It's another nice touch in a game, especially when it's a game about being alone in such a deep, dark, hostile, strange place. It's a nice little touch to have a little companion with you, and it's one of many nice little touches in this game. I feel like I can't say a huge amount more without spoiling it. There are elements of the gameplay that I don't want to spoil for you, but I will, without spoiling it, tell you that as you progress through the game, you are always given new things to work with. The game doesn't get boring, it doesn't rest on its laurels. The gameplay develops significantly from area to area with the different tools that you encounter and the different situations that you find yourself in. There are some cool boss battles in here, and the game ramps up to a really, really eye-opening finale. My jaw dropped open and I said no when the final area kind of revealed itself. So it's a game, it took me 9 hours to complete. I've read that some speedy players play it in 6 to 7, and that slower players play it in 10 to 12, so I came down somewhere in the middle. I did explore quite a bit, but I wasn't a completionist. I think I was on the third area by the time I realised what that sonar bell actually did. If I had actually realised earlier on, I might have cleaned up the map a little more, and maybe I'll come back to the game and enjoy some more time in this beautiful audio-visual environment and just go and clean up some other areas of the game. But it's a firm recommendation from me, Shinsekai, Into the Depths. It's on Apple Arcade, best played with a controller. It's also on Switch. I've read that it's best played in handheld, and that as it was a game developed for tablets and phones, it doesn't stand up especially well played on the screen. So if you do pick it up on Switch, I recommend playing it handheld and with headphones. Great game. A must-play for some Metroidvania fans, a really pleasant surprise, a gem in the Apple Arcade library. That's Shinsekai, Into the Depths. And as well as playing Shinsekai and dipping into Destiny and those other games, I've also been listening to some games podcasts this week. I started listening to Pixelated Playgrounds. It's a really fun book club style monthly podcast with a really pleasant, knowledgeable, amiable panel, and they talk about one game for each month. They have a really long back catalogue that goes back a couple of years. I found them when I was looking for podcasts about Disco Elysium. I just like hearing people talk about games that I've played and had a lot of thoughts about, so I listened to the Disco Elysium episode and really enjoyed their perspective. Each show is about an hour long, and they have a lot of really interesting thoughts on games, basically, so I went further back into their back catalogue. It turns out that I've got similar taste to those guys. They've covered games like A Short Hike, Journey, Hades, Spiritfarer, I'm just scrolling through here now, Celeste, Breath of the Wild, Hollow Knight, so Skyrim, games like that, Subnautica. So I recommend Pixelated Playgrounds. It's a show that only comes out once a month. I wish it was more regular because I've got a feeling that I'll burn through and probably listen to their back catalogue over the coming months. I really enjoyed it. I also listened to a show called Pocketoid. It's a game show that is ostensibly about retro gaming, handhelds and CRTs and things like that, but they also cover indie games generally, and they cover a really nice broad range of games. There's two guys on that show that just chat in a really nice relaxed way. It's a very funny, enjoyable show. So I'm going to recommend Pocketoid as well. So if you're looking for other games podcasts, I've got my favourites that I talk about quite regularly, such as Time Played 3HR, So Video Games, and the Short Game podcast. I listen to those ones every week. But I've added to that roster Pocketoid and Pixelated Playgrounds. So if you're interested in hearing more games podcasts and having more podcasts to listen to about video games, those are some strong recommendations from me. I'm going to wrap it up here, so thanks very much for listening. I hope you enjoyed hearing about Shinsekai. If you have played it, or if you do go ahead and play it, I'd love to hear your thoughts on it. You can find me on social media, on Twitter at Gaming in the Wild. I'm also on Instagram, I'm also on Twitch, YouTube, and Facebook, although I rarely use Facebook these days. I mean, who does, right? So please do come and find me on social media. That Patreon is there also if you've enjoyed this episode. It's patreon.com/gaminginthewild to support the show. Thanks very much for listening. Take care of yourselves and each other. I'll be back next week with a new show. Bye-bye for now.